Hello, I'm Anthony Zoller, and welcome to this week's Fridays 5. And you guessed it, I'm going to be talking about meal and rest breaks once again. So in this Fridays 5, I want to cover 5 issues that have been coming up recently about meal and rest breaks. A bit of an overview, but we have had some developments from the courts in 2017 that I wanted to discuss here as well. At the end of 2016 and 2017, we've actually been getting a couple of decisions about them. So the first issue I want to talk about is the timing of breaks. So for meal breaks, and it's a bit of a review for most employers, but for meal breaks, employees are entitled to a full 30 minutes, it can't be any shorter than 30 minutes, full 30 minutes before the employee's 5th hour of work, and a second meal break before the end of the employee's 10th hour of work. So for example, if the employee starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, they must have their 30-minute meal break before 12:59 p.m. And I've got some links below to some articles I've written with charts setting out some of the different timing requirements for the meal and rest breaks. So the timing requirements for rest breaks, basically employees are entitled to 10 minutes for a rest break. Once they work 3.5 hours to 6 hours, they get 20 minutes for shifts more than 6 hours up to 10 hours, and they have 30 minutes of rest breaks for shifts more than 10 hours up to 14 hours, and so on. And generally, the 10-minute break should be taken in the middle of each 4-hour work period, insofar as practicable. Number 2, I get the question a lot, can an employee waive their meal or rest break? So for meal breaks, it's a bit complicated, but generally speaking, no. Employees can only waive the meal break for shifts that are less than 6 hours in length. But if it's longer than 6 hours, they can't waive it. The employer should be having the employees clock out for their meal break, the 30-minute meal break, and recording that. For rest breaks, employees can waive the rest breaks, but again, it's not recommended. So have a policy that effectively allows the employees to be completely relieved of all duties for their 10-minute rest breaks and take those breaks. Now, the third item that I want to talk about today is the recording requirements for meal rest breaks. For meal breaks, employers in California have to record the meal breaks. So employers should require the employee to clock out and back in for their full 30-minute meal break. For rest breaks, there is no record recording requirement like there is for the rest breaks. So employers don't have to have the employees clocking in and out for the 10-minute rest breaks. A lot of employers find this administratively difficult, and for the 10 minutes, it just doesn't make sense for a lot of employers. Now, fourth, there's been a relatively recent new development on piece rate and commissioned employees and employers' obligation to pay for the 10-minute rest breaks for these types of employees. So Labor Code Section 226.2 requires that employers must pay piece rate workers for rest and recovery periods and other non-productive time separate from any piece rate compensation. Now, the employer, when they have piece rate employees, have to pay the higher of the employee's regular rate of pay or minimum wage. And the regular rate of pay is calculated on a work week basis. So the employer has to go back for the work week, figure out how much they were paid based on the piece rate compensation, how much that turned out to be per hour, and then make the determination if that met minimum wage or did not meet minimum wage. And for the 10-minute rest breaks, go back and actually pay the employee for the 10-minute rest breaks that the employees were eligible to take for the workday. It's administratively difficult to do, but employers need to be on top of this. And again, the pay that they have for those 10-minute rest breaks and non-productive time has to be reported separately on the employee's pay stub. So there's a lot on the back end administratively that employers have to be doing to comply with Labor Code Section 226.2. Now, the key holding that came out in the first quarter of 2017 was that this Labor Code section for piece rate employees also applies to commissioned employees as well, in the cases of Vaquero versus Stone Ledge Furniture. So, and I've got a link to an article I wrote about that as well below if you want to read more about that. But it's important that employers that might be subject to this requirement to report and pay employees separately for their rest breaks. Take a look at that and get some advice from qualified counsel. 5, and finally, employers need to be careful of on-call rest breaks or having employees subject to recall during their rest or meal breaks. There was a California Supreme Court ruling at the end of 2016. The case was Augustus versus ABM Security Services, and I wrote an article, and there's a link below for that as well. But basically, the security guards in that case were alleging that they weren't completely relieved of all duties for their 10-minute rest breaks because they had to keep their radios on and listen to their radios during the 10-minute rest breaks, and they were subject to recall during their 10-minute rest breaks. The California Supreme Court agreed with the security guards and said basically they were not relieved of all duties for the 10-minute rest breaks. So employers need to be careful about this requirement and ensure that the employees are being relieved of all duties for the 10-minute rest break and for the 30-minute meal break. The California Supreme Court ruled, and I quote, "One cannot square the practice of compelling employees to remain at the ready, tethered by time and policy to a particular location or communications devices, with the requirement to relieve employees of all work duties and employer control during 10-minute rest periods." So employers need to be careful that they completely relieve the employees of all duties, allow them to leave the premises even for the 10-minute rest breaks, so that there can't be an argument that the employee was subject to recall from their breaks. Now, that wraps up the 5 issues. As just one final reminder for employers, they should put a proper complaint procedure in place and remind employees routinely about the complaint procedure. If they missed any meal or rest breaks, to report it, and the employer should investigate those complaints. And if they missed the rest breaks, they should just go ahead and pay the employee the 1 hour of premium pay for any missed meal or rest breaks. And that will go a long way in showing that the employer had a proper complaint procedure and they took these complaints seriously. And then if the employees sue after the fact, claiming they didn't get these meal and rest breaks, it's going to create a big issue for them if they didn't complain when the employer actually has a proper complaint procedure in place and took these complaints seriously. So with that, I'll leave you with this Friday's 5. I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you soon.